Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening. First of all, thanks very much for joining to participate in this LinkedIn Live discussion on a topic that is what we believe is relevant for today, but whose importance and criticality will significantly increase in times to come. And as with things to do with technology and its implications, most often than not, they have a global relevance. And to talk about this global theme of trust and safety in Metaverse, we have a team of panelists that are joining from various parts of the globe. I'm Rajesh Ranjan, partner with the firm, joining from Bangalore, India. Apart from being famous as the Silicon Valley of India, I don't know how many of you know, but it's also called the Garden City of India. I moved here 1.5 years back and loving it. From that perspective, let me also invite my fellow analysts to introduce themselves. But as they are introducing themselves, if I may request folks who are joining to also let us know where are you joining in from. It will give us a good sense of the kind of audience that we have today and kind of participants that we have. So with that, let me pass it on to Manu.
Thanks, Rajesh. Hi, everyone. This is Manu here, partner with Everest Group, joining from the Big Apple, New York City, right here. It's a lovely day here. We had a bit of rain and early in the morning, but luckily clear sky so far. I don't think it's going to hold, though, because I still see clouds in the offing. So hopefully you're having better weather. But yeah, would love to hear where you're dialing in from, what kind of weather you're facing, etc., etc. Over to Abhi.
Thanks, Manu. Hi, everyone. This is Abhi. I'm a practice director with Everest Group. I look after trust and safety services. I'm joining in from London, and it's been, typical London weather, peekaboo, between the clouds and the sunny, to just keep alternating every 5 minutes. So, yeah, but lovely to be here today, right? Really excited. Please, let us know where you are logging in from.
Yeah, no, actually, I can see that, right? Clearly a global audience. I see folks from Delhi, Austin, Bangalore, Quebec, Ireland, Bucharest, Nashville,
Romania.
Yeah.
We're
So
covering pretty
so
global
far
audience.
covered 3 continents, I guess. Hopefully, we'll have more people. So again, glad that we have a global audience here and global participants. Before we get going, right? The key question here is, why are we talking about this particular topic? Why now? My intro part, I said, hey, it's quite relevant for today. It's going to be very, very important for tomorrow. But Manu, if I were to invite you and ask you kind of share why are we wanting to talk about this particular topic today?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not going to bore everyone with what Metaverse is, right? By now, pretty much every one of us knows that, right? Many of us probably already have an online presence in the Metaverse. So the important thing here is that, okay, if you think about the Metaverse, look at the opportunity it is now starting to present. Many analysts have already valued this market to be about $600 billion by the end of 2030. So 8 years from now, we're going to have over half $1 trillion being spent in the Metaverse. So this is clearly not something that we can ignore, right? We have to start talking about it a lot more. The thing that we want to really talk about today is the role of trust and safety in Metaverse. And why is that important? And there's a few reasons why I want to cover, right? See, if you think about the pilot that happened in Metaverse last year, even in the pilot itself, we started seeing instances of malcontent. We already saw some forms of abuse taking place. So it's pretty obvious that, hey, if this is going to happen in pilot, it is going to happen when the Metaverse eventually becomes scaled up. So if you don't start getting the trust and safety right from the get-go, we're going to have problems down the line, which is what we've seen in the past as well. The further complications are, if you think about the lack of standardization metaverse. It's metaverse is not one thing to everyone. It can be your brand presence. It can be a place for you to interact with your friends. It can be a place for you to come and do some gaming. It could be hundreds of things to hundreds of different people. So in such an environment, what does a trust and safety environment even look like? Right. And then there are financial transactions now that are taking place. There are people and brands who are buying real estate in metaverse. There's new forms of content coming up, new forms of engagement coming up. So clearly, with this kind of a huge explosion that's expected to happen on the volume side and the complexity of the content, the data, the users that are expected to be on the metaverse, trust and safety is really going to become the big thing in this world as well.
No, thank you very much, Manu. Abhi, do you want to kind of add any color to this? Do you kind of agree,
Yeah,
disagree?
absolutely. I mean, metaverse is not only about the some of the new things that might come up, but it is essentially some of the use cases that we see right now, and then them getting magnified, right? So, for example, financial fraud's already there, but with the kind of complications that are coming in with new technology, with new forms of financial frauds that are happening, it will become more challenging to moderate it. But the reason why we're talking about it now is it's important to understand that how all of the things that are happening today, how they have an implication on the metaverse as well, so that we can take the learnings from today and apply them to the metaverse, right? So plus, like Manu mentioned, even before it's become viable in pilot projects itself, if you have trust and safety use cases already happening, which means that it's probably kind of like a wake up call more than anything else, right? So
Okay, got it. No, thank you very much. So we clearly understand the importance, right? We know that metaverse, the possibility and the potential is big. What we are also talking about is, in a way, for that to realize its potential, the trust and safety part of the equation has to go hand in hand. It has to go parallel to a lot of investment that are happening in metaverse. Similar kind of investment thinking, all those things need to happen on the trust and safety side as well. Both needs to go in parallel. That's the criticality, that's the
yeah,
importance. So with that kind of a background and understanding, we thought about, hey, what are the things that we want to possibly discuss with you guys, right? So if we there are four themes that we have picked up, and while we our intention is to kind of cover some of those themes, we are not going to be bounded by these four, right? What we really want to actually uh, see and hear from you is what kind of questions do you have, right? What kind of questions that you think will benefit from this particular discussion. Of course, as we discuss some of these themes, absolutely would love to hear your experiences, your reactions, whether you agree or disagree. This is an embryonic area. This is an area that is developing, right? Because metaverse, as we know, is that's itself is developing, and hence the trust and safety part of it. We are taking kind of educated guess. We are forming a point of view, but it is up for discussion, debate. So with that, right, let me start with the first one, which is, hey, trust and safety as a concept, as a service is not new. We have been applying that to make our current virtual presence safe for all the users. So the question is, are there some learnings that we can take from social media or all the forms of trust and safety things that we have learned to the metaverse? Abhi, I may go to you first on this one.
sure. Thanks, Rajesh. Right. So there are some fundamental truths, if we say, the four key pillars, right, which form the bedrock of social media experience for users and the way trust and safety services have developed, right? And the key thing is that because these are fundamental principles, it's not that they are going to change even on the metaverse, right? So any form of content moderation, any form of platform safety, uh, operations or rules or regulations that apply on the metaverse have to take care of this, this four amongst others. So for example, we know that human behavior is unpredictable, right? You cannot really predict how someone is going to behave, and which is why, one of the primary reasons why, content moderation was needed in the first place, right? To uh, to make sure that that malcontent, does not get out on the public platforms, or to essentially monitor human behavior, right? How they behaving. And it's going to be the same on the metaverse, right? There'll be multiple social interactions in multiple scenarios, and how people will behave, we do not know, right? So it's essential that we set up some rules and regulations in terms of how, should be behaving for a safe platform, but at the same time monitor the behavior as we go along with those, interactions, right? Then the second thing is obviously, and this been forever, that customer needs any virtual experience, right? It's always localized. Like for example, your customer, your experience from a social media site, or Manu's experience, or for that matter anyone's experience who's joined us today, is going to be some ways maybe similar to mine, but it's also going to be very different to how I experience it, right? So every user has a different experience. So the way, you gain that experience from the social media, because it's different for everyone. So it's a challenge to localize that experience, and that's why, one of the key pillars of any trust and safety service is that, uh, the way we are thinking about safety, the way we are thinking about moderation, it has to be localized to that user. It has to create value for that user, right? The third thing obviously is the fact that, because there's a lot of localization and a lot of, regulatory policies which follow that, right? So they are driving the trust and safety policies for global platforms, right? So any global platform today, its popularity to the users is based on the fact that, it appeals to the sensibilities and to the needs of every single user who is using that platform for whatever his or her multiple needs, right? And obviously the fourth one being that, in terms of performing these services, yes, AI is there, but we know that AI is still not robust enough to understand context, which is why human intervention continues to be necessary. And it is going to be so even on the metaverse, right? Even at that scale, right? So these are those four fundamental pillars which we think which are true today, and which will be true even on the metaverse, right? So I would take that as the learning, right? uh, Now, when we apply this learnings to the metaverse, one of the key things to understand is that, one of the game changers probably will be the fact that it's not only going to be about moderation of content anymore, right? It's going to be about creating a very safe ecosystem, so that you create a very holistic user experience for everyone, right? So every single stakeholder for any platform on the metaverse, whether it be the platforms themselves, whether it be the, payment providers, whether it be the advertisers, the brands, whether it be the regulators, whether it be the support system, everyone has to come together to create that safe system, right? So that's why, the shift is from content moderation to trust and safety, right, as the name suggests. So it's about creating that, safe ecosystem, right? So yeah, that's what I think is the key learning over here, that while we apply the current concepts from, current trust and safety services, the important thing is to remember that it's not only about moderation of content anymore, it's about creating that safe space for everyone.
No, thanks very much, Abhi. And I see some of the comments that are coming through. From them are kind of possibly Suresh, Naresh. They are kind of confirming some of the points that you made. Again, as said, hey, this is meant to be kind of discussion and potentially debate. If you don't agree or if you have certain questions, absolutely feel free to ask. Manu, if I were to come to you, right, and again, say if you have any other color dimension that you want to add to what Abhi shared, what will you take?
No, absolutely. And I'm looking at some of the comments, right? So one of the biggest issues that we see in the metaverse today, or for that matter, any medium of interaction, is how do you achieve the balance between privacy and, let's say, customization? Right? Hey, I as a user, I really want to keep my stuff private, but at the same time, I want an experience which is tailor made for me. So I don't want to give away my data. I don't want you to know who I am, but I still want you to give me stuff that I need. So, and that's where the real issues start happening, right? So how do I achieve that balance? How do I do it in a way where my where my entire ecosystem stays safe, right? So to Abhi's point, right? I have payment instruments that are going on there, right? I need to make a payment for any kind of stuff I'm buying in the metaverse. Now, I don't want to give away my data, but I at the same time I expect my bank to keep my content safe. They should be able to keep my financial transactions safe. When I do this, I need to be able to save my credit card information for the next transaction, but that should not get released to the entity that is actually somebody I'm buying stuff from. So that balance is something which is going to get harder and harder to achieve in the metaverse, because now we're talking about an ecosystem where we basically do not have standards, right? So it's one thing to do this in social media, which honestly now realize we are in about what, year 15, year 16 of social media going big, right? Metaverse, we still in year zero. So a lot of these standards and frameworks will need to evolve over time, and we don't really know what direction these will take. And again, it goes back to the pilot example, right? Few weeks in, right, and we already started seeing issues in terms of trust and safety use cases coming up in metaverse. Who would have thought the pilot with only a few thousands of hundreds of thousands of users can actually create that? Imagine what happens when this reaches the scale of Facebook is, which is what, 2.93 billion users. So yeah, I see some very interesting questions coming up. Let's see if we can take some of those.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
While we have a look at that, one interesting thing to note is that, when we talk about the lack of standards for metaverse, right, it's not only in terms of how metaverse is defined, it's different for different users depending on how they want to use it. But think of it, something very simple as we have something like an HTML standard format for internet, right? Or even on the, mobile apps, we have, either Android phones or, Apple iPhones. Nothing as such exists yet on the metaverse today, right, which is going to connect multiple platforms together, create some, set of unique standards, right? So from that perspective also, the challenges that might come up, in one platform might be very difficult to moderate in the same way as another. So at this point in time, the lack of standards, actually gives rise to a host of further challenges which may come along, right?
Yeah, yeah. One of the questions, I don't know, Manu, whether you address that or not, is hey, what is your perspective on free speech, content moderation, and the ability to maintain trust and safety by Vishal, right? Uh, I think let me kind of add some more complexity here, right? I think this is raising debate, right? And all the social media part of the equation, right? The free speech and what do you moderate and all those things. There are enough views, and I don't know whether we want to have a view. But to me, the other element here is it's also about not only free speech, I can say free behavior, right? Because this is going to be synchronous. This is going to be real time, right? It's not about what you're saying and going away. It's what you are doing while you are there, right? So, are we thinking about, hey, some of those, I mean, in the real world, the role of what is called, law enforcement agencies, right? You're expected to behave in a particular way, right? And they are kind of making sure there's a social norm, whatever. But what's your thought? What is going to happen? What's the do you have any perspective? And this is for both Manu and Abhi.
So simple thing is, right, if you even think about the real world today, there's this huge debate on free speech, right? And it's evolved from becoming a debate around, okay, hey, what is right, what's wrong. It's become a political debate for most matters, right? Depending on which region you're logging in from today, I'm sure you will have government bodies who are trying kind of on both sides of it, right? You will have people who are advocating for free speech in its truest form. Look at what arguably Elon Musk was trying to do with in terms of him buying Twitter, that hey, I'm going to advocate free speech, doesn't matter what kind of content you have. But if it doesn't matter what kind of content you have on that platform, then the other end of the debate is, okay, what happens if that content is violating some of your other fundamental rights? What if I start getting abusive? What if I start creating mental or physical harm in the real world? And now when you start applying this concept to the metaverse, that's exactly the same thing, right? So how do I can do the same things in the virtual metaverse kind of world? I will have these digital avatars, I will have these augmented reality platforms, and now I'm going to land in a situation where I can actually be in a position of creating harm in a virtual setting. And realize in the physical world, you still have the limitations of physics. Now in the virtual world, that also goes away. So your ability to create harm gets exponential. So yeah, so I think what we will likely see is the evolution of or the equivalence of regulations and guidelines and consumer rights and constitutions and law enforcement. All of that is going to start eventually taking place in the metaverse. But the difference there is, okay, hey, the governments, individual countries and government, they get to control a lot of that in the physical world. Who has that right and power to control that in the metaverse? Is that going to be Meta? Is it going to be other providers? Is it going to be driven by social behavior? Is it going to be driven by regulations? That is the real question that is kind of need to be addressed right now.
Yeah, and then subsequently we will kind of talk about some of ways to think about it, right? Again, we don't have a specific answer, but some of the ways to think about it, right? Why multiple stakeholders need to kind of come together, right? And again, learn from what we have not been able to do quick enough, let's say on the social media part of the equation, right? And how do we kind of port that proactively? And then I also see some of the users were kind of talking about other problems, right? So a very interesting one which says, hey, another problem lies in proving your identity in metaverse, as bots can easily mimic your style, data, personality, and whole identity. You will need different verification methods like facial scans, retina scans, voice recognition for authentication, right? Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, Rajesh, we actually trust and safety, even now we see this problem around theft of user identity, right? So it's kind of the same thing on metaverse in terms of the use case, but yeah, I mean the technologies are more advanced, so detection obviously is more challenging. Uh, and also the other thing is that on the metaverse in terms of the regulations, right, like Manu mentioned, so the multiple stakeholders need to come together, and there are regulation implications for each of those stakeholders. But the other implication, which let's say is running across all of this, is the fact that in terms of regulations, will there be a separation between the virtual identity and the physical identity, or will there be a conjoining of the two? So I'll give you an example. Every time, let's say, an abuse happens on the virtual world, right, the regulations are still ambiguous in terms of, do you hold the virtual avatar responsible, or do you hold the physical person behind that virtual avatar responsible? And the same thing happens even for something as real as what we are seeing right now in terms of NFTs, right? Every time there is a junk NFT coming up, or there's an NFT scam happening, the question is, who is responsible? Is it the person who created the NFT who's responsible, or is it the person who holds the actual physical asset based on which the NFT was created is responsible, right? So those regulatory ambiguities are there, but I think as we move along this journey and as we learn, right, so probably it will get better, right? But the implications in terms of how you use those regulations to provide a very localized experience to your user, despite being a global platform. And on the metaverse, again, it's like uh, essentially experience and communication between different platforms. Yeah, that will be one of the key things to watch out for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to make is, yes, we are talking about a lot of the issues and challenges, and trust and safety part of this thing comes along that, right? When there are issues and challenges, how to manage it. Just want to underscore that point is, hey, metaverse as a concept, we all know that, but just to underscore that, right? As a concept, as a technology, or as a channel, if I may use that word, also has a lot of benefits, right? What we are talking about is how do we harness the power of metaverse, this concept, this technology, which helps the user, potentially the humankind, right? It's not like something is going to come in the human. We are talking about something new that is coming, which has significant potential, poses significant opportunity. How do we run some of those things in parallel, start to think about some of those things in parallel in a proactive manner, so that potential and the user experience and the benefits are realized, right? Just to kind of again underscore that point. This is important. Okay, good. Okay, so why don't we kind of keep on moving? We kind of touched upon some of these, right? About, there are certain use cases, Abhi, I think you were mentioning when you touched upon as well, right? There are certain use cases which are which were then the typical social media and all those things, right? They
Yeah,
are going to be
yeah,
ported, right?
yeah.
But then there are going to be new use cases. Again, we would have touched upon some of those things, but there's specific thing that you would want to highlight. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have spoken about, the abuse of virtual avatars or the safety of virtual assets, right? Which uh, might seem new in the way that they're specific to the metaverse, especially in a virtual avatars. We still don't have that much on the social media world, but there are like the concerns around data privacy, user safety, or the well-being of content moderators, right? So these are some of the burning issues that have been there in trust and safety, still there, and they're probably also going to be on the metaverse. So for example, the fact that content moderators are going to be moderating a lot of live content, what's the impact of that, right, on their mental well-being? As of now, it's still, yes, live content is coming up, but as of now a lot of the content is still, it's post dated, right? So the implications are different, right? The issues that are happening or the mental well-being challenge that the moderators are facing now, they're probably going to get magnified on the metaverse, right, when you deal with different kinds of content, and when it is not only going to be about just content anymore, right, but about an entire ecosystem. Similarly, the we had comments from around concerns around data privacy and user safety. So what Manu mentioned, that ensuring that my data is safe, but at the same time I want a localized holistic user experience for me, that is still present today, right, on social media. But and that's going to be true even on the metaverse, right? So while there are new use cases, yeah, like I mentioned, abuse of virtual avatars and all, some of those use cases are essentially getting ported over from social media to the metaverse, right? So it's going to be a combination of the two, right?
Yeah, I think
And
the couple of things I would kind of add also there, right? If you think about the kind of newer challenges that we're going to face, and so again, the chat is full of some of these things, right? You're talking about, hey, what happens in terms of child addiction as well as child safety, right? What do you do with protection of your digital identity versus physical identity? So I think there's a lot of chatter that we're seeing around that. Realize what we're talking about is again a very kind of a nascent concept, right? So I know there's a comment in there which says, hey, let's say Finland has this concept around digital IDs, but realize first of all, not every country has those yet. The second thing is the linkage between the physical ID to the national ID. That is something which is fairly loose, because your national ID is the identity theft there is much harder. It still happens, right? We have all come across situations and heard instances where your physical IDs get stolen. There's theft, there's ID theft and stuff like that. In the digital world, it becomes a lot more pressing. There's a comment much earlier in the chat which talked about, okay, hey, using other forms of authentication. So realize we have now seen situations where retina scans are getting stolen. They're getting mimicked by either bots or by alternate fraud actors. So in those kind of environments, fundamentally new concept of identity protection, theft protection, all of those things will need to come up as well. So that's where a lot of these trust and safety use cases will come from, because you will have to detect those bad actors. You will have to start predicting and responding to human behaviors as these new bad actors come more and more in the metaverse, and they start coming up with those next unique case. I can't even predict what that next one is going to look like, but I bet it's going to be something challenging for the trust and safety world.
Yep. Yep. And then we have some more questions coming through. Amia, yeah, he has posed a question. Could you also share some thoughts on enterprises embracing the metaverse for end user engagement, and how different from gaming social media, and how trust and safety applies in these scenarios? Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, there's this entire thing around employee experience part of the picture, right? Which is kind of a big thing, right? I don't know, Manu, Abhi, right? What are the other things that you're picking up in terms of the, again, use cases and the trust and
Yep.
safety implications around it?
right. I mean, Raj, there is an entire universe around the financial transactions as well, right? I mean, irrespective of whether it's a social media or an e-commerce website, some of the financial frauds that are already kind of shaping up, right, on the metaverse. So, for example, this pump and dump schemes where fraudsters essentially create very fraudulent NFTs and they create an ecosystem which drives the price of NFTs up, and then they suddenly cash out and become invisible, right? Leaving the investors high and dry. So those kind of financial frauds which are happening, they also, yeah, those are again some of the challenges which will be excavated on the metaverse, right? And in terms of providing again that holistic user experience, it will not only be around making sure that there is less abuse and less malcontent, but also making sure that such financial transactions are safe, and actually that you do not fall into the, say, trap of the scamsters, or the platform is that robust that scamsters do not get to engage with people in such a fraudulent way in the first place, right? So all such those are, there are trust and safety use cases as there as well. And then if you take even around what we see right now, fake reviews and on e-commerce websites, right? Those are going to continue even on the metaverse, right? I mean, for the fact that in Amazon we have verified sellers and buyers, which kind of gives one form of authentication, right? Yeah, those use cases will be there on the metaverse as well, and they in fact might have applications beyond just those platforms. And then the
Yeah.
other one being, what I would also want to highlight over here is that the changing role of platforms, right? So social media platforms not being used as social media platforms only anymore, right? I mean, even now we find that for people in the age group of 13 to 18, uh, the they use social media platforms in addition to social media platforms as search engines, right? That is going to continue on the metaverse as well. So in fact, Google Chrome was surpassed by Facebook and Instagram for that age group in terms of search engine. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
If
again, I think as it relates to, hey, sorry, Manu. Yeah, let me complete that, right? Again, I talked about, let's say, the entire employee experience part of the picture, right? As an enterprise, right? Again, you want to kind of organize things, right, at an enterprise level, or the various things that are going to happen in metaverse. Of course, some of the organizations are already doing it, right? Um, and some of those things going to be internal to enterprises. Some of those things we're going to invite your vendor partners, a lot of other parties to that world, right? Again, you got to make sure that the same safety concerns are proactively addressed and managed as it happens in the real world, right? So I mean, in the physical, again, the corporate and all those things, we know that sexual harassment and all those things that are kind of the strict norms around it, right? How do you kind of make sure that some of those things are also happening here, right? So as you kind of start to expand into it, right, the multiple use cases that start emerging. Sorry, Manu, I didn't want to cut you off, but yeah, please go ahead.
No, this is absolutely fair, right? And my point is going to be actually supplementary to that. When you think of metaverse, right, in many ways you think of this as a medium of interaction. So anything that can happen in an offline world can actually happen in the metaverse, right? So to question that Amir had around the end user engagement, any use case, right? We talk about gaming and social media more because realize the early adoption of metaverse was mostly in the teenagers, early 20s kind of crowd. So that's where those use cases became more popular. But as metaverse starts scaling up, you will see a lot more people popping up there. So can't there be use cases related to customers coming on there and asking questions to their banks? Can there be healthcare use cases where they're doing virtual telehealth kind of visits on in there? And that brings the complexity around, okay, engaging the users in that channel. Plus realize the potential it opens up to. If you can have some of the let's say the patient monitoring kind of use cases applied for somebody who's actually at home and logs into the metaverse, could a virtual avatar of a doctor actually come in there, backed by obviously the physical doctor themselves, and then actually get those vital signs right there and guide them on the process. I'm not saying by any means it's going to replace the need for physical care, but can it you get your early triage done through the metaverse? And what that does is that, okay, hey, while it opens up this whole can around end user engagement, it also wants to make sure that, okay, now all of your physical compliance laws start correlating back to the virtual world as well. I need to ensure my HIPAA compliance. I need to ensure my GDPR compliance in the metaverse. How do you do that when basically you don't even know where somebody's logging from? So when I'm on the metaverse, I don't know what country is somebody else that logging in from when I'm interacting with them. And if they're coming in from Europe where GDPR laws are straight, maybe we end up exchanging some information that we weren't supposed to. So what happens to that kind of data? So that kind of complexities will give rise to whole suite of trust and safety use cases and the end user engagement use cases.
Yeah. Just to,
Yeah, that's an interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
I just had one of the funnier examples actually. So there was this company who bought real estate on Metaverse, and they hosted a kind of symposium on that real estate on the Metaverse. So when people logged in, right, the first thing they saw was an ad of a person dancing to the tunes of Macarena, which was not supposed to be there. So these are some of the use cases that are coming up. Need not be social media per se, right? It can happen anywhere, right? It was simply around an ad being at the wrong place at the wrong time, right? So yeah, I mean, this use case is popping up all over the place.
Hence ad moderation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One of the interesting question I see is how do you see the regulations in this area evolve, and how ready do you see are the governments in creating policies? Are you seeing any initial movements in this area? Are we seeing any initial movements in this area?
So I don't want to be too critical of governments. I am hoping somebody is not logging in already from the from some of the Congress, but hopefully they don't. These comments don't get to them. But realize what we've seen is even in the basic formats of social media, which have now been around for almost 2 decades, a lot of the Congress hasn't really been able to figure out how to moderate that, right? Look at the kind of questions that came up to actually to Mark Zuckerberg when he was got hauled up into Congress like a few months ago. Even the basic concept around, okay, hey, how does Facebook make money, which is what now a 15-year-old concept, wasn't very clear to a lot of people sitting there. So how do we really expect governments to respond to environments that they don't really understand? If they don't understand social media, understanding metaverse is the next challenge, right? That doesn't mean that there is no steps happening, right? It just means that, okay, hey, the pace of change and their ability to learn these concepts and adapt to these concepts and then design regulations around these concepts is going to have a slower journey, which is
Yeah.
where the role of social, how do I call it, right? The basically the kind of influence we as users have on these companies becomes more important. Look at a lot of the policies that these large big techs are designing. It has less to do with the regulations and more to do with what their customers are telling them, what their vendor partners are telling them, what their own employees are telling them. A lot of debate happened last year when several employees at big tech companies started resigning because they did not agree with the content moderation, trust and safety policies of their employers. So that is the place where more change is happening at a faster pace. Regulation, as the way I see it, it's more responding to that change and starting to codify it. Some countries are definitely doing a better job of it. I would argue Europe is maybe a slightly ahead, at least parts of Europe are ahead of what, let's say, the large geographies like US and China are. But then there are also countries which have their own vested interests. Look at what's happening in China and Middle East and Russia for that matter. It has nothing to do with finding the right trust and safety environment. It's about, okay, what are the policies that those governments want to drive as well. So a lot of those are vested interests that are taking precedence as opposed to designing the broader trust and safety policy umbrella.
And
Yeah,
then there is,
yeah,
another tricky part, whenever, for that matter, any regulator designing these regulations, you have to be very careful that about the socio-political climate in your country. You cannot simply go about creating regulations, let's say, which kind of creates very stringent content moderation policies, which infringe on the fundamental right to, freedom of expression for people, right? So it has to be that, very tight rope that they generally walk between these two. So yeah, so it's not about, it's not only of the fact that, yeah, it's been slow to react and it's mostly been reactive. They have to be very careful that when they're designing such policies, there is a fine line between the two.
yeah. One other interesting question I want to pick up here is coming from Sanjay Singh. Moving from content moderation to experience moderation in live immersive scenarios would require very different skills. What's our views on that?
Hmm. So honestly, fairly interesting question and one that I even haven't kind of fathomed so far. But yeah, I think that's a very valid question, right? See, content moderation is all about, okay, what content do I get exposed to? But experience moderation is about, okay, what experience I want. And this goes back to the conversation around, okay, how do I get the customized experience without my privacy getting violated, right? So, and this is the place where if you start thinking about, again, taking a couple of examples from the non-metaverse world, right? Think about what Google has basically said in terms of doing away with third-party cookies, right? What Apple did earlier this year or late last year in terms of removing IDFA. So what they're basically saying, hey, we're going to do away with any kind of third-party data. So any brand, any entity who wants to start engaging customers, they'll have to find their own way of creating that data sets. You can't rely on information that you're getting from these large platforms to design and tailor those experiences. So, and that's where the role of first party cookies actually became much more important as opposed to third party. But this is one way of how do you ensure better experience, or how do you ensure better privacy while delivering experience. Unfortunately, the way it stands today, the big brands who have access to that kind of consumer data from a first party perspective, they end up winning. The smaller, medium sized business, they getting squeezed quite hard because they don't really have access to that data. So I wish I had a better answer for this question, but that's what it looks like. At least in the short term, we don't really see that changing for the small, medium businesses. But getting to the first party data part of it does start helping you address some of the experience part of it, getting that experience out without getting your privacy violated.
Right. I mean, some of the larger enterprises are still trying out several ways, right, to uh, essentially provide uh, such kind of a experience for the user. So what they're doing is, now when we think about content moderation, it's essentially been moderation of content that has already been produced, or according to some rules and regulations. What enterprises are doing now is they're taking lessons from the physical world and trying to apply that to the virtual world, right? So for example, we have this concept of virtual reality bouncers now on the metaverse, right? So these people, not only do they have you know uh, rights and permissions in terms of who they can let people be on the platform and who they can throw out, but they also at the same time are experienced in content moderation to immediately catch if there is a certain kind of human behavior which is coming up, right, which might be abusive in the long term. And then I think Meta came up with that concept of a boundary where personal boundary where the VRs could only interact with each other from a safe distance. So yeah, I mean, there are steps which are being tried out in terms of taking content moderation to basically being an experience moderation where you do it in the real time, you do it with the speed and accuracy, you do it with the context. But yeah, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Avi, as you mentioned that, right, about the bounces and stuff like that, right? What was going in my mind was, again, porting from, or taking it from real life to this digital immersive that we're trying to create. This is actually a digital twin, right, of what is already there, right?
Yeah.
Now it's for humans. Uh, and as we think about the skills that are required for the content moderators, right, people who are going to be responsible to moderate the behavior, not the content, but the behavior and all those things they've talked about. Now, are they going to be similar to stuff that we try to assess in within security services? Let's say one way, right? Or sometimes like the traffic police that way. I mean, what are the things that we look into in someone who is good at anticipating, or once they see something, intervening, right? So there's some parallels possibly we will have to see. The other big thing that is going to happen is, and feel free to challenge it, is it will require a different kind of training. Definitely require a different kind of training. So there's a skill set assessment which need to be apt for the work that you need to do, but also there's a significant amount of new training that you need to do, right, for the content moderators. Do you see that ways? Do you see it to be different?
So honestly, if you think about the role of content moderators, first of all, right, and the challenges they'll have to go through, I think in the earlier version slide as well, we mentioned some of the stuff that they will have to kind of go through additional layers of complexity. And in fact, think about the experience in the metaverse, right? You're talking about real time live interactions, right? It's not a chat or a text or a video that you're going to send and it's going to travel around the world. You're going to be in that metaverse digital immersive experience. Whatever you say is going to immediately translate, right? Yeah, you have maybe a split second there to kind of kind of filter out some stuff, right? Eventually they will have tools and technologies that can actually do that very, very effectively. But you're still talking about experiences where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of consumers eventually are going to come and interact in live setting. So I, as a content moderator, how do I even keep pace with that, right? How do I do some of this real-time moderation stuff? A lot of this stuff will basically become an evolution of humans and technology kind of working together, right? The tech will help you filter out stuff or actually detect stuff faster, and the human judgment will actually help you figure out, okay, what really goes out and what does not. So part of that is going to be the extra stress that comes onto the content moderators, the kind of stuff that they will have to go through. But realize, metaverse can potentially be a world where content moderators actually come together and they can actually log in from different parts of the world and give you better services. You can, one of the biggest issues with we see with content moderators these days is, okay, hey, how do we manage your wellness better? So can we have more psychometric evaluations, or can we have better access to resources in that digital world so that content moderators don't have to wait around till the next time they get into offices, because pretty much everybody's working hybrid these days, as Vishal is also talking about in his comment and question. So if you're working in a hybrid world, how do I get access to those resources which my firm was earlier making available? But so one of the answers to that is actually the metaverse as well. So metaverse is not just full of negative use cases; it's also full of all these potential use cases which can actually advance the condition. So yeah, the moderators are going to come under a lot more pressure, but them being on the metaverse can actually also open up opportunities for their employers to actually help mitigate the impact that they go through in a much better environment as well.
Yeah, I think then you addressed one of the questions posed by Rachit in terms of what's your view on whether wellness will play a more important role, a fundamentally different role in well-being of our employees in content moderation. Yeah, I mean, for sure, right? At one level, that's why I think there's a kind of a prep part of the equation. How do we kind of assess the skill? How do we train? But also, how do we kind of help them do their job in a much more effective fashion? So, yeah.
Right. I mean, it has to be the training itself has to be a combination of both the proactive measures as well as reactive measures, right? And also, it has to take care of the fact that not only are the new use cases coming up, new ways of let's say malcontent which are coming up on this various platforms, but even the technology is changing, right? So something can be as fundamental as what is the impact of a content moderator having a VR headset on for, let's say, 9 to 10 hours, right? Does that seriously affect his or her mental well-being? But on the whole, I think, yeah, like Manu mentioned, it's not only about the negative connotations. Metaverse also has a lot of positive effects as well. One of them being accelerating the hybrid work environment, especially some of the classic concerns around how do you ensure for data security for sensitive data if you're using a hybrid work environment and all of that. I think some of the fundamental inherent let's say safety measures of the metaverse itself, and the way that content moderators will be armed with those let's say the technologies and the permissions to moderate the environment, I think that will obviously, I think it will kind of accelerate that move towards a hybrid working model.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So, again, I think as part of this discovery, this discussion, and very interesting set of questions and comments, guys, thank you very much. Keep those coming. Seems like, organizations, not, this is clear that organizations will have to not only focus meaningfully, but also put the money where the mouth is, right? So they will have to kind of spend to ensure that it is a place which is safe, user gets the right experience, immersive experience, so on and so forth. And which also means that organizations who provide these services will have a lot of opportunity to participate and help, right? How do you see that impacting the overall trust and safety services market? What's your view? I know that you guys have done some analysis around that.
So, I mean, Rajesh, the fact is, the enterprise spend, right, is going to follow the adoption of the metaverse. as it grows, right? So while it is a few years away, but in terms of spend, it's going to grow gradually and then probably take off once the metaverse becomes viable. But what that means is there are certain let's say implications or challenges that enterprises need to work out, and there are obviously multiple ways to do that. One of them being the fact that you know essentially this means trust and safety services at a much more massive scale, right? So you need that right mix of talent and technology to solve for that, right? So not only does is let's say AI will probably take on that role of being able to help with the scale, but human intervention will also be very, very critical to ensure context, ensure accuracy, ensure let's say speed for live moderation, especially, right? We talked about VR bouncers. They are performing actually quite critical roles, especially in such events. So that's one. And then obviously there's the question around that: do this talent then require specialized skills, right? And our thought is that it's not only specialized skills, it's probably augmentation of the current skills that they already have as content moderators, along with maybe technical know-how of some of the new technologies that will come up, plus being aware and being trained on some of the nuances of the metaverse, right? I think that will make the metaverse ready more than anything else. And then there is obviously the thing around that: how do you ensure that it's not only about trust and safety, but essentially ensuring for end-to-end metaverse support, right? Now it can be right from, let's say, creation of content to moderating ads to moderating the entire experience, right? So it's not just about partnering up for services in silos. It's about finding those synergies across multiple domains, which all come together, like we mentioned, to essentially create a safe but holistic experience for the user, right? So yeah, I mean, so that's how those are the important implications or important, let's say, considerations that enterprises will have in terms of maybe finding the right partner for creating that experience for the user.
So put the other way, and I'm looking at the data here, right? The growth opportunity for trust and providing trust and safety services, right? Especially when once you take into account the metaverse part of the equation is significant, is huge, right? Because we all talked about, right? There's such a need with the need whose criticality and importance is just going to grow, right? So it's a pretty big opportunity, but at the same time, what we are also picking up is you got to be then be proactive about making some of those investment to be ready, right, to be able to provide those services. Because as we are talking about it, probably some of the organizations who have taken a particular approach on sourcing for TNS services may require kind of slightly different consideration or possibly meaningfully different consideration because some of the dynamics are different. Yes, there are things which are common, but other things, there are many things that we picked up which are different. So that's kind of interesting. One of the questions I want to kind of just pick it up is, which has come: any views on cost implications for brands, enterprises when it comes to setting up sourcing TNS services for the metaverse? Do you think a lot of brands, enterprises are going to be spooked by these implications, likely to show aversion to adopting metaverse with open arms? Interesting question. Interesting
Well,
question. Thank you.
yeah, I mean, really, actually, a lot of thanks for this question. And one of the things that we have been hearing and we have noticed is that metaverse is one of those areas where you need a lot of collaboration, right? And it's not only about just being just sourcing or services, right? It's about collaborating, co-investing, right, to come up with let's say either solutions or come up with that experience, right? And in fact, they're already wouldn't say industry, I mean industry collaborations which are coming up between multiple companies who are coming together and discussing their metaverse challenges, the metaverse experience, the kind of issues they think that may happen on the metaverse, and they're all trying to find the solution together, right? So in terms of whether the cost implications, whether they'll get spooked by the cost implications, we don't think so, given the volume of content and the number of users that will be there on the metaverse, it I would even go out on a limb and say that trust and safety essentially becomes an essential service rather than just being whether you want to do it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the question here is, hey, because yes, we are talking about a lot of challenges. Again, talk of challenge, a lot of issues, and then hence the need for trust and safety. What we haven't spoken about is again the opportunity that it creates for enterprises, brands, right? What metaverse offers, right, to really engage users, or for that matter, a variety of ecosystem partners, right? So one obviously one will have to look at the business case, the ROI, and all that, right? But what we have learned from social media and all those things, right? In terms of user engagement, there also again the same set of issues came in, but that did not prevent any enterprise to not have a strong social media presence, right? So from that perspective, I don't think this is will be that big a bottleneck, right? That they will shun away, that they will not participate in this. But yeah, if you are not proactively thinking about it, as we are, I mean, time and again saying it, right? In tandem thinking about it, you are going to compromise on the possibility that you have in terms of upside potential, right? So to maximize the potential, enterprises, and that is what our guidance and suggestion to enterprises are, right? Think both of these things hand in hand, right? To be able to maximize your opportunity here.
Yeah, the honestly, the only thing I'll add here is that if you think about it for from a brand's perspective or anybody who wants to be in the metaverse, look at this, right? Many of the brands, they're trying to cater to the new generation, and we are basically now trying to start catering to what we call as a TikTok generation, right? Low attention span, low consumption of content, right? You're not talking about people who are going to be watching 1 hour webinars, by the way, right? So these LinkedIn live events, yeah, these are great substitutions to those webinars, but what does this next look like for the next generation, which barely has attention span to watch more than 30 seconds of a video or a clip at a time? And in that context, if the only ways for you to engage your next generation of users is going to become, let's say, channels like Metaverse, then can you really stay out of it? So yeah, as with any new technology or experiences, there are going to be leaders and there are going to be laggards, right? Obviously, there are brands who are going to embrace this very early in the process. They might actually be much more ahead of some of their peers when it finally scales up. Versus, yeah, there are going to be laggards, but eventually the fear of missing out, the FOMO effect is going to come kick in, and brands will have to start having a presence on metaverse. As that happens, if they don't really already have a trust and safety policy in place, they're going to start struggling even more, as opposed to taking a proactive stance when things are still coming up. It's still easy for me to
Yeah.
figure out trust and safety today when I have maybe 100 users engaging with me on the metaverse on a daily basis. How is this going to change when it's going to be suddenly 100,000 users engaging with me on a daily basis? So I can scale up if I start early, versus otherwise it's going to be drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's a question
Speaking,
of just one last comment. It's probably a question of what is the cost of missing out rather than cost of actually engaging.
yeah, at one level, probably I can also, this is going to be the cost of doing business,
Yeah.
right? At one level. I mean, one of the ways to think about it, but I think the positive way to again think about it's not about cost of doing business. This is not about creating superior experience. That is what the technology is about. And how do you facilitate that, right? This is all about that, right? And Manu, as we are kind of saying, right, hey, we are having this LinkedIn live and whatnot. Shreyans did suggest, right, that next time we should have this conversation.
Oh,
So
looks like we've lost Rajesh. I think he's off to the metaverse now.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I do notice the time. But yeah, hopefully next time we will have this in the metaverse. But yeah, I'm just hoping that the generation that we start getting to has a little more attention span than the 30 seconds. I think this audience definitely did show us that. But we'll see what happens when we get into our next event as well. Raj, looks
Yeah,
like you're back.
sorry. Yeah. No. So actually, thanks for covering that, right? And again, in metaverse, well, the broadband and all those things, the requirement is going to be huge, right? We won't face these issues that we have
Or,
faced
or
today.
or is it another avatar of you that we are talking to, Rajesh? No, the first.
Well, okay, good. Yeah, guys, I'm noticing the time here, and we have actually still getting some questions. we'll possibly take one more, and then we'll start to wrap up. This question is from Nitin Singh. Are there any specific industry sectors where TNS spends will be significantly higher due to virtue of metaverse?
Right. I mean, we have some obvious candidates like social media and gaming, but like you mentioned before, that because this is more about it's a medium of interaction, like a channel, right? It's not really confined to one industry, right? So we have use cases across not only social media and gaming, but across e-commerce, across travel and hospitality, across media and entertainment services like OTT channels, right? Yeah, even governments for that matter, right? I mean, at some point in time, I mean, they are also a stakeholder. At some point in time, they also need to come together, right? So to make that a holistic experience. Plus, like I mentioned before, it's not only about social media as it is today, but about the changing role of these platforms, right? So yeah, all across the industries.
Yeah. Hey,
I
great
think
guys. Sorry.
Sir, just last comment. I think one key thing to observe here is also going to be the evolving debate around the role of platforms. Traditionally, trust and safety has been left to the role of to platforms to decide, but eventually this is going to get democratized. What I mean by that is brands will also start thinking about their own trust and safety. I'm not just going to rely on let's say a Meta's for policy for content moderation to make sure that my brand stays secure. I'll need to have my own layer of defense in the form of trust and safety. And we're starting to see that in the social media world. Given the metaverse concept is still new, I wouldn't be surprised if most of the brands start doing it almost from day one.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, wonderful. Again, we can continue this discussion, and such a important topic and such a relevant topic. Uh, we also wanted to kind of leave you with some questions, right? For which, honestly, we didn't have that discussion, right? And as we discovered, there are a lot of unknown questions, right? But if you can pull up those that particular slide, when yeah, there are quite a few open questions, right? Can you moderate the metaverse at scale? What role will AI play versus human intelligence in moderation? We talked about how can we ensure the well-being of moderators in the metaverse. Again, we have some cues, we don't have specific answers. How will moderators adapt to real-time moderation to support? Again, we talked about this. Overall, again, this is a start of a dialogue. You know where you can find us, of course, on LinkedIn. Feel free to kind of reach out to us to continue this dialogue and conversation. We'll continue to kind of focus a meaningful amount of our energies on this evolving area, very important, critical area. You'll see us coming out with more research in this space. Again, thank you very much. You guys have been a fantastic participant. And I'm speaking on behalf of my co-panelists. We thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. Hopefully you also found this to be useful. Again, thank you very much, guys. Have a good rest of your day, evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. It's really nice.